it's Crystal here from Speaking of Wildlife, and we are so excited to be joining you virtually for Barrie Winterfest. In this video series, you'll have an opportunity to meet some of Speaking of Wildlife's wildlife ambassadors, like Maverick the Wolf, who's joined me in this introduction. We'll give you an update on some of the animals that you met during Barrie's Canada Day celebrations in 2020, and we'll chat a little bit about winter adaptations, wildlife in your backyard, and we'll have some winter fun too. Now, before we get started, we always like to introduce the center and sort of what we do here. All of the animals that call Speaking of Wildlife home are with us because they cannot survive in the wild where they belong. Some of these animals were injured, orphaned, abandoned, others were illegally kept as pets, and in all cases, these animals cannot be released to the wild. So they'll live out the rest of their days with us, where we provide their essential needs like veterinary care, balanced diets, and enrichment, as well as specialized care for their individual needs, abilities, and of course their desires. We want to make sure they get some of their favorite things in there too. So with all of that information and that background for you, I think we better get started. So let's go. Here we are alongside some of our small mammal enclosures. These enclosures were designed and built so that the animals that inhabit them can choose whether they spend their time indoors or out. They can come out and enjoy the fresh air or experience the elements or stay tucked away indoors. It's totally up to them. Now, this is easy in our warm summer months, but as the winter nears, we need to start making some decisions. We need to decide whether the animals that live here would prefer or would thrive indoors or out in the cold winter months. Now, in some cases, such as the one we'll talk about today, the animal actually helps us to make the decision. This little gal will actually move all of the substrate in her enclosure up against the door, barricading the door shut. Pretty good indication to us that she'd much rather be indoors than out in the cold. Now, if we look at her wild counterparts, this is true of them as well. They'd be deep underground, sleeping the winters away. So do you think you know who we're talking about today? The first hint was that it was a small mammal. Your second hint, that they'd be deep underground, sleeping at this time of year. And your third hint is that they're a bit of a celebrity in February. In fact, we have an entire day, February 2nd, dedicated to them. So now do you know who we're talking about? Let's head inside and find out. Well, did you guess right? It's a groundhog. And this is Caddyshack. Now, Caddyshack came to us when she was just a baby because unfortunately she was orphaned or abandoned in the wild, and she ended up in wildlife rehabilitation. But at that time, she was the only groundhog in care. So she didn't have any friends of her own species and unfortunately became a little too used to her human caregivers and couldn't be released back to the wild. Now in Caddyshack's case, she settled in quite nicely to her role as a wildlife ambassador, and she also has a reputation around here for being a pretty good meteorologist. This means that she helps to predict or forecast the weather. At least that's what they tell us on February 2nd, Groundhog Day. Now they say that these true hibernators will come out of their burrows, and if they see their shadows, that means we'll have 6 more weeks of winter. And if they don't see the shadow, well, that means we'll have an early spring. So, what do you guys think? Look outside your windows. Are groundhogs coming up out of the ground today? It's probably a little snowy out there. It's been quite cold. I think those groundhogs are sound asleep. You see, they're true hibernators, which means in the fall they've built up all of these fat and all of this extra energy, then they've gone deep down underground below the frost line and they've fallen asleep. They're in such a deep sleep that they won't wake up again until the spring. They've buried themselves right in there. And in the spring, they'll be looking for 2 things. They'll be looking for vegetation because these guys are a herbivore, so they like to eat plants, and they'll be looking for a mate, which means other groundhogs have to be awake too. So I think the groundhogs out in the wild in Ontario right now are probably thinking, it's not quite spring yet. And for Caddyshack here, we always love her predictions because this little gal is so spoiled she lives indoors in the winter. And if we put her outside on February 2nd, I can almost guarantee she won't even look for that shadow. And if she doesn't see her shadow, we're in for an early spring. All right, that's a wrap on this segment of our Barrie Winterfest video series. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to learn a little bit more about Speaking of Wildlife, feel free to check us out on Facebook or Instagram or at speakingofwildlife.ca. And until next time, take care.